You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
Saw the games, physical basketball
I was at the games.
versus
You were
physical
not.
fouling.
You watched them on YouTube.
Anyway.
I saw the games. I watched the
Well, we're here. I'm Bob Moats. Welcome to X's and Joe's, a podcast dedicated to decoding the winning formula in college basketball.
And I'm Mike Weemuth, welcoming you to episode 10, Data-Driven Basketball, Coaching and Talent Evaluation, recorded on the evening of May 13th, 2024. So, Bob, it appears we're a trio again.
Did Jared double book us for like an IU film room overlap or something, or how'd this happen? But
we've upgraded from the Everly Brothers to ZZ Top, so we're much better company now.
Through that, we welcome Tony Adragna to the podcast. For those of you who don't know Tony, through his work through not just the IU film room, but through various YouTube and other basketball videos that he's been doing over the years, a lot for Indiana basketball, for some others as well. We're glad to have him on tonight.
And we should also mention he's the co-host of Right Up Meridian, a Pacers podcast. So
very pertinent right now.
Exactly. Yeah, right. And he's your co-host with our pal Scott from the Back Home Network.
Correct.
Awesome.
So I remember first running into Tony a couple of years ago, back I think it was Archie Miller's third season, when you were the one who decoded that IU was running mover blocker offense, and I remember excitedly sharing the YouTube link with anybody that knew what a basketball was, saying, "Have you seen what this guy's doing? I mean, this is amazing, the level of detail explanation that's going on here." And he's from Southport. Can't we get this guy down to Columbus to start coaching some of our teams? That was my first instinct was, can we poach this guy from Southport? And over the years, it's been we've gotten to know each other pretty well, I would say, over the last 2 or 3, really the last 2 years in particular, just through our good friend, the Godfather Sam Story.
Yeah, so you mentioned that blocker mover video that I created. That was a painful creation. that was that was not like what I was thinking I'd be doing in 2021, whatever it was. It was not what I was hoping to be doing in my free time, is making blocker mover YouTube videos. But there I was, I gave the people what they wanted. I figured out all of the sauce that Archie Miller was just cooking with in his IU era. But no, it's great to be here, guys. I'm excited to chat some hoops with you guys, and as you mentioned, we've had numerous conversations. We basically have had a running text thread now for years where we chat about these things primarily through the written word, and so I'm excited to hop on here together and just chat some hoops.
Yeah, I would note that I'm being an introvert. I don't text very often, so it would come as no surprise probably to you guys. About 95% of my texting activity takes place between the four of us. So my wife actually asked me before, just on a random vacation, like, "Who is this Tony Adragna? Who is this person that keeps texting you?" So yeah, we definitely have a very fun...
I bet she looks hideous.
Yeah, exactly.
This Tony girl, she looks horrible.
Yeah. We have a very fun and interesting conversation that hasn't really ended yet over the past 2 years. So it's we hope it keeps going.
Exactly.
Well, we keep finding some great things to talk about, and also when we're like doing different podcasts or shows or stuff, we'll look at each other's backgrounds and wonder what would look good behind Tony, or what would look good behind Mike. And so we have a wonderful piece of art that was donated by the Cabal.
Yes.
Would you like to explain what that is, Tony?
Well, it's only the best piece of artwork in history of the world. It's I don't know for those of you that are watching, you can see that it's the dogs playing poker, and it's an iconic photo. And it came to light. It came in my possession actually, doing an assembly call video one time. And again, if you're watching me now, I do have a green screen behind me at this point, but my excuse used to be that I had just recently moved and we just hadn't gotten anything on the walls yet. But now it's been about 2 years and I still don't have anything on the walls behind me in my office. So the great trio of Bob, Mike, and Sam Story were like, let's get this guy some wall pieces to hang up. So here it is. They pooled some money together and got me my first piece of art, and I'm proud to display it today. At one point, that will hang on my wall. I can't promise you it'll be within the next 5 to 10 years, but it will be there. It'll at least be here by my side. But no, it shows it goes to show just the sense of humor that we've got too. It's just like, man, what the hell is Tony doing? Like, he doesn't have anything behind him, and then within 5 minutes, I've got a picture being delivered to my house. Like, it's awesome, and it's got a hilarious backstory. Like, my wife, as soon as I told her, like, we're getting a picture we're gonna have to display, and she's just like, IU fans are weird.
Tony, you remember my only request that followed that purchase was that we want to get a photo of Jess as she first views this, fine masterpiece, on the wall. So it was, and you did come through. I did like a photo of her first seeing the that.
It's like the first look at weddings. It was just as beautiful.
Yeah,
exactly. It's like I can. No doubt she had the same reaction as the curators of the Louvre had when the Mona Lisa first arrived. So.
100%.
I was going to say that when the Pope walked in and saw the Sistine Chapel for the first time and said, Michelangelo, this is art. This is art.
It was something along those lines.
Yeah, good. So speaking of art, let's talk about the art of home field apparel. And with Father's Day coming up, getting your orders in now to see what's available. First off, see what's available on the website or the app, and start thinking of your Father's Day wish lists. I'm wearing part of my Father's Day gift tonight with the Bison. I know we've talked about a lot of different products with Arrow McLaren, another Indy card drop that just happened as well. So keeping your eyes peeled on that. Mike, what do you got in mind for home field these days? What's pushing you?
Well, on the theme of Father's Day, I noted that when I was looking through yesterday that they have a selection of 42 different dad hats from a variety of colleges and universities, including IU, Purdue, and Indiana State. And yes, it's literally listed on their website as "quote unquote" dad hats. So I think that's like an absolutely perfect Father's Day purchase for anyone jumping on the site. And highlighting the Indy 500 drop Home Field made was like a week or two ago is really, they had some really cool stuff in there. It has captured a lot of attention. Obviously it's the month of May, so nobody has better retro race gear than Home Field, especially if you look at that IMS checkered flag bomber jacket. That thing is pretty sweet. So yeah, be sure to check out the variety of hats, hoodies, and sweatshirts, bomber jackets, and tees available for all the special dads in your life at homefieldapparel.com. So Bob, let's jump into it. Let's find out who this Tony Adragna guy is.
Yeah, who the hell is Tony Adragna anyway?
That's a good question. I mean, every good comic book character has like an origin story. So we can get into the what that narrative looks like for our guests. So Tony, we're kicking it to you. What's your background? How did you arrive at this state, being on this podcast and being just someone on the Back Home Network who's drawn a pretty decent degree of attention within the IU fan network?
Yeah, and unfortunately, somehow turned into like a polarizing figure, which was which was not the intention of me talking about IU basketball. But no, in all seriousness, I don't take it lightly that people do follow me for analysis on their favorite team. Like, with sports comes so much joy, so much heartbreak, so many emotions, escapes from reality, all kinds of different things. So like, it sounds cheesy and cliche because I'm just a podcaster. Like, people, trust me, I am just a podcaster, just a has-been, wannabe, whatever you want to call it. But that people, will take time out of their day to listen to what I have to say about something they care a ton about. Like, I don't take that lightly. It's why I prepare for shows just like this and try to do the best I can on breakdowns and things like that. But it kind of rewinds itself all the way back to like how I played the game of basketball. So I was a varsity basketball player at Southport High School. Was part of 2 successful teams my junior and senior year. Was a captain my senior year. I don't know if a lot of people know about like Southport basketball that listen to this podcast, but it's historically not a great program in terms of just like sustained success. So, we were over 500 in my junior and senior year, which I take a ton of pride in. And if you can see me, I don't look like I'm just like this guy that's oozing athleticism and height or anything like that. And so, kind of how I said, I attack everything very seriously, and like how I do film room is how I attack the game when I played. Like, I always try to just gain an advantage by outsmarting, out hustling, and out preparing my opponent. And so, like, even back when we were still getting, like, when I played, it wasn't that terribly long ago. I graduated high school in 2009, but like, we were still getting like game film on tapes, like videotapes, and it was a lot harder to dissect film back then. But that's kind of where like I grew into my love for film and preparation. Really, like when I was 16, 17 years old, and it wasn't necessarily out of like curiosity. It was out of like, have to, if you want to see the floor, for me. And so that's kind of like the very beginnings of IU Film Room was really, some house or the Southport High School field house in 2006, 2007 on the south side of Indianapolis. Like, that's where IU Film Room really got its start, the roots of just like how I attacked, how I played the game of basketball.
At Southport, did you have a lot of like film prep that took place back then? I mean, was that something that was introduced to you, or did you kind of take that up on your own?
Yeah, so our coaches would give us, sometimes it was VHS or sometimes it was DVD of our opponents, and we would watch usually like the fourth quarter of their previous game and kind of get some nuanced things, and then we'd go over a scouting report. So, scouting reports were still handwritten back then, and then they would copy them and give them all to us. Like, it's funny, I still have my binder of all my scouting reports, and I have one from when we played Bloomington South, and Jordan Holes was our opponent, and just like seeing what his scouting report was as a high school player versus what it was as a college player. Like, as a high school player, it was like, can get to the rim at will, obviously could shoot the hell out of the ball, but it was like strong defender. So it was kind of interesting to see the scouting report on him as a high schooler, just looking back at some of my old scouting reports recently. But yeah, so when we prepared, it wasn't like this crazy preparation. They would have some of the opponent's sets drawn up and stuff like that, but really I would focus on, who my matchup was going to be, what their tendencies were going to be, and then I really tried to dive into, okay, what are the sets that this team's going to run against us, and just really try to give myself as much of an advantage as I possibly could. And fortunately, that was how most of my teammates also attacked the game. Again, like I said, we were historically pretty good for Southport standards, and it was just the way we kind of attacked things. And, obviously that's credit to our coaches and stuff as well. Up through my junior year, I was coached by Jason Delaney, who's now the head coach at Cathedral, has won 3 state titles. He's the only coach to ever win a state title in 2 different classes in the state of Indiana. So I had him through my junior year. My senior year, we had an interim coach in Mark Eccles. He was on staff all 4 years of my career. But obviously, some of those things that I was taught there were instilled in me by some coaches and things that I have, just like any other coach. But yeah, so the prep piece of it, some of it was our coaches getting us prepared, and some of it was just like me and my buddies just like, yeah, we should probably dive into this if we want to have a chance.
So how do you think that's changed? How has it evolved? And I mean, obviously the technology, I remember about 2 or 3 years after you've been done playing, sitting at Jason Spears' computer in his social studies room at North and watching some huddle as they were, as he's kind of, looking at that electronically. And obviously everybody kept stat sheets. Every coach kind of used to keep their own special sauce of analytics at that time. How has that evolved over the last, what you would say, 10 years or so in your estimation?
It's night and day at the high school level. I mean, it really is. Our coaches back in the day, they would go scout in person. If you wanted to know what the personnel was of the other teams, you pretty much had to go scout in person. They'd scout a couple games at a time to try and get a rough estimate of what their stat lines looked like, and then would put pen to paper and kind of write down what they thought. But it was like, it's nothing like it is now, because now it's supposed to be a requirement that coaches upload their stats to max preps. So you are supposed to, now not all of them do it or do it accurately on purpose, but hypothetically you're supposed to have those stats on there. And so you can get stats of all your opponents. You can get every single game your opponent has played. You can grab all of their sets and clip them all 100. You could get 100 clips of everything that they run. You can clip individual players and write down their tendencies, where like if you used to want to do that, it's like pressing pause on one VCR and pause on the other to get it transferred over tape to tape, and like extremely time consuming. And so the fact that Huddle came to be about a decade ago now, where you can exchange film with other coaches and instantly. That's another thing. You used to actually have to go exchange film. You'd have to go to a fellow coach's house or their gym or whatever the case may be, meet up like it was essentially a drug deal and swap actual film of common opponents. And so like there's no more of that. Now it's just like hitting a button on Huddle and it's like, hey, can we get that film? And we'll give you this film. And so it's very, very interesting in terms of the evolution of technology. And that was one thing I always prided myself on, even as I started at Southport, was like, I'm going to get us as high tech as possible. I'm going to take the stats. I'm going to get our advanced stats. I'm going to get shot charts of everything. I'm going to have our shot charts by quarter. And I'm going to see how many paint touches we get and what our offense dictates on that. At one point, I even charted every set that we ran, so we had our success rate on every set that we ran. And like it was easy to do that. Like I could just, as the game was going on, I was doing it on my iPad. And like, I'm sure the coaches I had back when I played would have loved to have that data at their disposal, but it was literally impossible unless you want to have 25 coaches on staff charting every little thing, and then you'd have to throw it like in an Excel spreadsheet or something. Whereas now it just spits it all out. So it's night and day difference. It's really cool. I think it helps advance the game forward. I think it helps people like me that want to coach be able to do that like at a high school level, almost like what colleges were at a decade ago. And it really gives you an opportunity to dive into a lot of really cool technology. So the evolution is just, for the longest time, there wasn't a lot of change in terms of the technology of coaching basketball. It was film your games, exchange film with other teams, write down scouting reports. Now it's just anything you want, you can get. I mean, I think Southport High School now has what's like Huddle Assist, where it's got a bunch of cameras all over the gym, and it's charting the shots for you now, based on camera angles and stuff like that. So it's just vastly, vastly different.
I remember when Harry Kreider was a 6th grader, and that was about the time you and I, you were at IU, Tony. And I had a dad, Mark Foster, John Foster's dad, was up there. and he had the iPad, and it was a game changer. As a coach, for the first time, having that sort of weaponry at your fingertips as to not just a shot chart, but they'd be able to do some very basic analytics with a bunch of sixth graders showing this is why this decision isn't as good as is not your best and your most optimal decision on the offensive end, or why what they're doing defensively is why what we're doing defensively isn't really working against them offensively. So yeah, it's definitely been a game change in so many respects over the last decade, and maybe I would even say 15 years since Huddle's come on. On the high school level, it's even filtering down into the elementary school levels, where we now have the key is you got to find good people that can actually run the machinery. Sometimes parents aren't always the best as they're yelling at their kid or something, or they're yelling at an official. You missed about 2 minutes of action there while you were typing.
Or the camera shakes.
That was a mark, but exactly.
So when I was at Southport, we had our managers would film the games, and we would send our film to other teams and stuff. And one of the coaches hit us back up that we sent our film to and was like, "Hey, do you guys ever listen to this with the sound on?" It's like, "No, we don't." And we turn it on, and it was like, "Oh my God." We have to have a talk with our managers. It was bad. Like that very raunchy stuff being said. Just you're on camera, fellas. Yeah, it was.
I've had friends of mine in wedding videos with similar problems. It's like,
yes,
guys, you didn't realize the videographer is right there. You probably ought to tone it down about 5 levels.
Correct.
Well, that's a good review of Southport. Tony, why don't you tell us about your time at IU? Not just the academic side, but what were you doing in your basketball life, and how was that evolving as you were going through Bloomington?
Yeah, so kind of, I always knew I wanted to coach from a young age. Once you see one of your teammates dunk it in 8th grade, and you're like, I can't touch the net. You're like, all right, probably not hitting the NBA. Like, we're gonna have to figure some other things out here if we want to stay around the game. So, I always knew I wanted to coach. So when I got into college, it was like the cliche thing to do is like go teach history and coach. And so I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna go teach history. And so I started my undergrad as a history teacher, did 3 semesters of that before I really I got good grades. I just was like getting into having to start looking at like student teaching and stuff. And I'm just like, I just can't see myself giving my all to the classroom. Like to me, it's one of the things that I struggle with education in general is like, they want people to be teachers, but people are becoming teachers just so they can coach, and it's just it's a delicate balance there. But it's a whole other side rant. But I basically was like, look, I can't give this thing my all if I want to coach. Like, I'm going to try to go an unconventional route and not be a teacher and still be able to coach. And so, really, I just kind of looked around. I was like, all right, what else does IU offer? I was like, well, Kelly School's out of the question because you got to get into that as a freshman or you're going to be way behind. I did get a business minor, but really it was just like, what am I going to be passionate about? And kept coming back to sports and really sports communication. It's like, I love talking about sports. I had a sports blog when I was a junior in high school, like where I would just like, very bad sports blog. I would just like predict, here's who's going to make the NBA finals and here's going to make the NCAA finals. And then about 8 months later, I'd come back to him and be like, wow, I was wrong. Follow me for more great. Like it's a bad blog, but I did blog.
Is that blog still out there somewhere, Tony?
It is. Actually, it just came up on my Facebook memories. It was a subdomain on blogspot.com.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to find it. Yeah, it's like Tony's B-ball thoughts 26, 29, 24, 28.blogspot.com or something crazy like that. So I'll have to find it.
Yeah, not only do you need to find it, you need to share it with
yes,
your friends. So we would love to see that.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I decided on sports communication. I got connected with Dr. Galen Clavio pretty much right away, and he was very instrumental in like pushing me in the right directions. I think he saw pretty early on that I had a pretty strong passion for it, but also had a pretty decent knowledge of primarily basketball, but some other sports as well. And so got involved with WIUX down there, the radio station, Big Ten Student U, and got to do a lot of play-by-play. I was on a national broadcast. Like, this is hilarious to me now I look back. I was on a national broadcast of number 1 versus number 2 in the country in men's soccer, IU versus Notre Dame. I didn't know a thing about soccer going into college. Like, I remember studying, playing FIFA for like a week straight, trying to just like, I can't sound like an idiot. Like, people are going to really be tuning in to like hear me calling this game. So that was an interesting one. But yeah, I got to, like, Big Ten Network broadcast that game like live. Like, it was a live game, and I was calling it on play-by-play as a junior in college. So got to do a lot of really cool things. Got to be the play-by-play kind of like MC on Big Ten Network of Hoosier Hysteria when IU was number 1 in the country, and that was really cool. There was, again, a ton of people tune into that because of the interest level was at an all-time high, and really got to do some cool stuff with that. Played in the.
Remember, that's how I first recognized you.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
Like, I remember when we first started interacting, I kept thinking, like, I know this guy from somewhere. Like, somehow he just looks familiar. And then I remember that you were on some of those early Big Ten Network broadcasts. Like, that's him.
Yeah, it was. To be honest, like, I look back on it, it was a pretty horrible product. Like, the kids that are like in the program now, across the board, like in terms of production and talent and everything, were vastly better than I was when I was in school. But like, we were just getting it off the ground, and so it was all a learning experience, and it was so much fun. Like, all my buddies and stuff were like cramming for exams, and it's just like, I'm off to call a softball doubleheader, and that was my school. So like that was really cool, and something that I'm so happy I did. Like, I could have slugged through college and gotten my history teaching degree and probably not had a ton of fun, but I was afforded a lot of really cool opportunities because of like the major that I chose. And again, in terms of like my professional life, I've never used that major again. Like, I've never I never pursued a job in broadcasting or anything like that. Like, this is part of that. Like, it helped me prepare for things like this. But in terms of like job prospecting and stuff like that, like, I never used my degree again, but I would go back and I would do that degree all over again if I could, because it was so much fun. Something people don't also realize, and it spoils the crap out of us IU students, is that you get to cover a Division I Power 5 program, and then as soon as you're out that door, you're going to like Dubuque, Iowa, and you're covering, table tennis, and like, you're not covering Indiana University basketball more times than not. And so that was basically my big wake-up call, is like, I have a girlfriend that's still in Bloomington. I like being in Indianapolis around my family, and nobody around here is going to hire me to do broadcasting. And so that's one thing that you don't really realize when you go into it, is like, you're getting to cover a lot of really high-level things that you probably won't do again for like 10 to 15 years. And, people in my program, like Courtney Cronin and Trisha Whitaker, are both, like, Courtney Cronin's on, every time I turn on ESPN, she's on there now. Trisha Whitaker is the Rays sideline reporter. She's on Apple TV on Friday nights for their MLB coverage. Like, worked with some really talented people. And it, again, like, it was just such a cool experience to be able to do that. And alongside that, like, I got to be around the basketball team a lot. And like, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be around the team in some way, shape, or form. And it just so happened I was pretty lucky that the team was rounding into form as I was kind of rounding into form in terms of broadcasting. And so my junior year was the year of the Watt Shot. My senior year was the year they were preseason number 1. And so I got to cover a lot of really good basketball and, the height of the Tom Crean era. And so that was really cool too. And just a really, really neat experience that just like that energy that I had towards the game of basketball was maintained, because like I was as ingrained into IU fandom as I had ever been, being a student there, and it was a lot of fun to be around it because they were really freaking good.
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned that. When you mentioned Trisha Whitaker, she worked with my good friend John Dissauer at Channel 4 for a few years. He's a weather guy, And it is pretty amazing when you kind of think about just what you guys were doing, kind of blazing trails, building a media school, by the way, I might add, at IU. There's always been the School of Journalism. IU had always been more of a print, I think, more of a print institution versus, with journalism. There was some electronic, but for the most part, going into that world where kind of from the ground up and looking at how do you, as students, what role can you play in covering events? As you've kind of gone through, as you're kind of looking at where things are now, I mean, it seems like you have no regrets about the decision you made to leave history, do this, and then go to where you've gone in life, which is where you're at right now, which is doing pretty well.
Yeah, zero regrets. And a lot of it prepared me in a weird way for what I do now. Like for people that don't know, like my day job, I'm the president of a company called DVC Rental Store. We rent out Disney's timeshare hotels, essentially. Like that's the long and the short of it. And it's a fairly high position up at my company, and I got here because I had good like public speaking skills and leadership skills from being the managing editor at IU Sportcom, like a lot of things. And I got into it really from marketing by doing social media marketing while I was in college of like our IU Sportcom channels and my broadcasts I was doing, like doing it organically, not really understanding how it was going to push me forward in the long run. But a lot of skills I developed in that program still help me to this day and help me get to where I am in a completely unrelated job field. And then aside from that, it has helped me tremendously in terms of doing things like this. And this is where I have a ton of fun in my life, like where I get to just talk about basketball and IU hoops with a couple of other hoops junkies. Like if it prepared me just for this, like this is worth it, right? And so it helped me get my name out there. It helped me really lose some of like the shyness I had or like caring about what people thought about me. Used to have a lot of imposter syndrome. Like there's no way like people care what I have to say. Like why even write this tweet or why even put this video out? And really helped me overcome a lot of that by being in the program. And like I said, Galen Clavio was monumental in kind of helping us overcome that. And then when you look at the monster he's built at the media school, like you said, like you can't say enough great things about what he's building there. He's building the Yukon Huskies of media schools, right? Like just putting out number one team after number one team. So yeah, no regrets at all. And it's really helped me in terms of where I've gotten in my professional life, even in weird roundabout ways.
That's great.
I would say that, again, Mike and I both can attest to this, learning what you learned through any sort of student leadership position, because you do have a good safety net. And that's the first thing is that, you have good faculty advisors, guys like Doc Clavio. In our case, we had a whole litany of them for student government as well, where they could kind of prevent us from hitting pure concrete versus when we stumbled, being able to recover from it fairly quickly. And again, a lot of it's just learning how to work with humans. And I think that's where coaching fits in more. I think if you talk to any of us when we first got into coaching, we thought, man, we really got to get the X's and O's down. We really need to understand how the game works. And the more I've gotten into this, the more I have to I really first have to understand how people work. The X's and O's come, the drills come, the fundamental skill teaching. If I'm teaching, or if I'm like when I was teaching history myself, and I think, you and I, we barely just missed each other because I know that I did my 1 year T to T 2010, 2011. So we almost could have been in the same methods class in the social, with Keith Barton if we had been lucky.
Yep.
That was that 1 year I took off to do that, to change careers. But let me tell you, being in a room, being the 30-ish guy in a room full of undergraduates is definitely a strange experience. I walked into my methods class. I saw a kid I coached as a sixth grader sitting in the corner. I said, "Oh, hell, when did I get this old?" And that was like 15 years ago. I'm like, wait a minute. This is not Jordan. You're not. No, well, I guess you are a college junior now. So I guess it does kind of give you that sort of feeling. It just gives you that experience, that real world experience with some parameters that's incredibly helpful. And so dads, moms, if you're listening to this and your kid says, yeah, I really want to do this student activity, and you're like, well, how's it going to impact your studies? Let them do the student activity, because I think we all agree it's only an enhancement of what you're gonna be able to do. And you never know those pieces that you're going to be able to put together that go in a job interview or in your career where you're sitting at your desk going, this looks familiar. Yeah, I've dealt with a situation similar to this before. So
absolutely.
So then you went back to, so you know, like a few people we know, you went back to your hometown. Some people tend to do that after they get out of IU, right?
I did.
Yeah.
So yeah, literally, I graduated May of 2013, and Southport had just hired a new coach in Kyle Simpson the previous year, and he was all about just like getting the alumni back to Southport, like people that mattered, because Southport had been through a really rough stretch after I graduated. They got a new coach, lost a lot of games, and then that coach left and Kyle Simpson came in, and he had just reached out on like Facebook or something and was just like, hey, you know, if you're ever interested in getting back involved with the program, like, you got a spot. So I graduated in May and hit him up and was just like, hey man, I'm interested in taking you up on that. And he's like, well, that's great news, because our 7th grade head coaching spot is open and it's yours. And so just like that, I was thrown into the fire, and we started, you know, having summer workouts like the next week. And so all of a sudden I went from student to coach very quickly. And it's exactly what you mentioned, Bob. It's like you go into it and you're like, I know basketball, especially, you know, with me, I was like, I know basketball. I played my whole life. Like, I was just around the #1 team in the country. Like, this is a piece of cake. And then you get there and you're just like, you know, you have to learn how to like speak to not only people, but like kids, especially, you know, 7th graders. You have to learn what motivates people. Each person's motivated differently. And it's just a really unique, you know, conglomerate of different personalities that you got to try to figure out how to make one. And so I struggled like hell my first year. I think we went 3-13. A sidebar, I was also coaching my girlfriend at the time, now my wife. I was coaching her brother. He was in 7th grade, so that was an interesting dynamic because, you know, a lot of people that follow me know this. Like, my brother-in-law went on to have a very successful basketball career, played in the Division II National Championship last season, just graduated from West Liberty University, and just had, you know, 1,000-point scorer in college. But, like, at the time in 7th grade, he was the tallest kid on the team. He was the most skilled kid on the team. He was the biggest pain in my butt. And he was my girlfriend at the time's little brother. So it was like, you know, trying to figure out that dynamic was even more unique. And like I said, we struggled. We were like 3-13. And, you know, that was really where I was like, man, like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And I need to start trying to figure that out and take this a little bit more seriously. And then my next season as a coach, as a 7th grader, I had a good group. We won a lot of games. I moved up with that group to 8th grade. And at the time, too, my day job was with a company called Breakthrough Basketball. I was our marketing manager at the time. And we basically put out training videos and blogs and things for coaches. And so, like, my whole life was basketball at that point in time. And it, you know, was a ton of fun, and, you know, got to learn a lot of really cool things. And Breakthrough Basketball had thousands upon thousands of dollars worth of training videos that they sold that I got free access to. So, like, that was worth its weight in gold to an up-and-coming coach that, you know, I dove into every single video that they had and multiple times, and all of the resources that they had. And so it really helped me become a better basketball coach as well, and kind of learning that, like, lifelong learner mentality and putting your ego aside, and, like, you don't know everything. And, you know, started looking at leadership differently as well. And, like, you know, it's not like dictatorial. How I don't know the word I'm trying to look. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
You know, that leadership typically isn't going to work, especially with, like, middle school kids from a low-income district. And really learned a lot about myself and coaching. And, you know, my last year of middle school is my 3rd year of coaching. I was really starting to kind of find a groove that, first of all, is with the same group of kids from the previous season. So had already built a relationship, which, like, then you learn like chemistry and cohesion is a real thing. As a coach, and we, a lot of people would make fun of me for this, for even saying it, but like we broke the school record for wins. I was proud of that. Like, I don't care if it was just eighth grade basketball. Like that was really neat. For the IU fans listening to this, Joey Brunk's little brother was on my team. He played nothing like Joey, to be honest. Like he was a knockdown, lights out, left-handed point guard shooter. He was big. He was bigger than everybody, but he was very, very skilled. And unfortunately, concussions kind of ended his basketball career prematurely. But he was a great kid to coach. Kind of was our leader. Had the same like mentality and mannerisms of Joey. Like if everybody can remember, he was pretty emotional, pretty fired up when he played. Like that's how his brother played too. But yeah. So with that, our head coach called me up. Kyle Simpson was like, "Hey, are you interested in moving to the high school level? Like, seems like you're pretty ambitious about this." And from there, I moved up to the high school level, where I was at Southport, I believe, for 5 years, and really just learned a lot, again, about myself, about the game of basketball. And that's really where I started diving into film work, and looking at the game from like a 40,000-foot view. Like I mentioned when I played, like I looked at the little nuances of how I could gain an advantage on one particular player or one thing like that. Like as a coach, I started seeing it as like, oh, here's how we have an advantage holistically, and here's what that team's trying to do, and here's how we can take that away as a whole. And not only because as a coach, you can go through 500 clips to try to figure out how to take away somebody's strength. You got to figure out how to put that in like a 10-second time frame for your kids, or you're going to lose them, and they're not going to understand. And so like it was trying to figure out how to get all this information and disseminate it down to a one-page scouting report and 10 minutes of clips tops, and things like that. So like that was really where I got like a keen eye for how the game was played and what coaches were trying to do and taking away those strengths. It was my favorite. Like as an assistant, we would get like every third game, we would get the scouting report, would be our responsibility. And like those are my favorite games, obviously. Sat by the head coach, would tell them what the other team was trying to do, would bark it out to our players on the court, would prepare them all week for what the other team was trying to do, and got to play scout team players and stuff like that. So it was a lot of fun, but also, like I said, where I really started looking at film as like the tool to be a basketball coach.
Yeah, it's interesting. The I guess transitioning to film, especially like I used to work at a place called B Lab, which was run by the guys that founded and won basketball products, and they of course had like the basketball like highlight videos and all that. So I know around that time that there was just a ton of like work going into like like anything related to basketball videos was like something that had a lot of jobs going on. So I think that's interesting that you've found a job in that kind of niche in Indianapolis.
Yeah, and it's
Well,
go ahead, Bob.
that was also the time that YouTube was kicking in. I mean, we when you could literally just and so the whole clip, now you're going from. I mean, I think back when Tony was in high school and I was first getting into coaching, we knew the stories were out there that Izzo was recruiting in his area and was starting to keep his files on 5th and 6th grade players by that time. And within a few years, you now had, clips of, being uploaded of a 12-year-old that's dunking or watching people or just watching at early ages, just being able to put really well-produced 3-4 minute videos showcasing a kid's talents out there onto the marketplace. And was it all that worthwhile? I would say probably not, because you're just seeing the best of what a kid's able to do. But it was definitely something that was kind of a game change in how the game's profile had changed over the last, really since in this century. And with kind of the ascendancy of travel ball in particular, where kids are playing all over the country at younger and younger ages, it's made an indelible impact on not just how coaches have to coach, but also on what players' expectations are.
And just
I
how the
think.
game's consumed in general. You know, it's in smaller bites, highlights. You know, when as a point guard in 2009, my biggest fear was getting my ankles broken and it being on camera. And Marcus Teague at Pike broke my ankles horribly, and it is on camera. And I hope that is burned somewhere far, far away. I mean, like when you talk about just like absolutely broken ankles, sat down flat on my butt, like that was the what Marcus Teague did to me. And I was a senior and he was a freshman, by the way, when that happened. But that's also the hilarity of high school sports is that like somebody like me that just like talks about the game now as a mid-30s guy was on the same floor as this dude that was winning the national championship at Kentucky as a freshman. Like had no business being on the same floor as that kid, but that's the beauty of high school sports.
Don't worry, Tony.
Well,
We'll find that
one of my
clip and
inspirations.
we'll put that in the show notes. By the way,
Perfect. You might have to hit up my like old high school basketball coach for that.
we'll do that.
I might have it in on Delaney. I may make a phone call to an old friend on that one. But no, we won't do too much here, man. We like it too much here. I would say I always tell my kids it's like don't be you need to defend a certain way. You need to play a certain way because you don't be the kid in the YouTube video with the Nikes on your eyebrow with your mouth wide open, gaping there with your arms open. Don't have and I've also found over the years that it's like I used to always tell a kid. Yeah, you're not going to be on. This isn't a Sports Center highlight, but I've also found as the game's changed, the other problem we're running into now is with video game basketball. Like now, these kids don't necessarily consume the game watching it. They're running LeBron on idiot mode, scoring 200 points a game, where there's Steph Curry shooting at 35 feet the whole time, and so their physical gifts don't always match what they're able to do with a controller. And so you're right how that consumption is happening in smaller and smaller clips and. Really, just in a world where it's where the art of watching a full game, maybe it's something as coaches I feel like we have to teach. We have to teach kids how to kind of consume the game in its entirety versus here are those 10. But at the same time, you also need to look at it from a standpoint of it needs to be digestible for a room full of kids because their attention span may not be. They're not going to sit there for 45 minutes and watch it with you, and you're going to run it back 12 times like it was the 1970s. On that old 35 millimeter film.
Exactly. And that's one of the hardest things I think to learn as a new coach is that like, it doesn't matter what you think more times than not. It's like, how does your team react to what you're saying? How do they take in what you're saying? How do they learn? It's like, what I always equate it to is, there's the book that, I had to read before I got married called The 5 Love Languages. And it's like, you learn your wife's love language and you're supposed to speak that language to her and not your own. And it's like that with kids. It's like kids learn differently. And, what works for one kid doesn't work for the other. And you gotta figure out that balance of it. And so it's why I love coaching the game of basketball because it's as much about, as you mentioned, Bob, relationships, team building, cohesiveness, chemistry, all of those buzzwords as it is X's and O's and diving into the game. Now, don't get me wrong. I absolutely love the X's and O's, and they can 1,000% change a game and give your team an advantage they wouldn't have otherwise. But there are all those other things that do still absolutely matter. It's the name of your podcast, X's and Joe's, right? It's a little bit of everything that goes into making that kind of holistic view of a team and give it the most positive trajectory and chance of winning.
Hey, Tony, speaking of
and
YouTube
when we
highlights,
come back from our
really quick, Bob, before we do that, I think we have to do this quickly before.
Let's go. Let's do it. Let's
yeah. So speaking of YouTube highlights, Tony, there's a YouTube of you on Assembly Hall's floor that I think you should really walk us through because it is it's adorable, and I think we're definitely going to put that in the show notes. So why don't you walk us through your performance on the mid court at Assembly Hall?
Yeah, so there was 3 seconds left. I had 29 points, and sadly, it has nothing to do with basketball.
Yep. but it is more important.
Yes. So, this is part of why I don't regret anything of what I did as a college student, because I met great people. And Jeremy Gray, who is now the PA voice at Assembly Hall and is an assistant athletic director for communications for Indiana Athletics, became a good friend of mine through doing broadcast stuff, and just had a lot of similar interests and things like that. And so my wife and I, my girlfriend at the time, we were high school sweethearts. We've been together since I was 16. She was 15. We had both graduated college, and like you had mentioned, we both moved back to our hometowns. And I decided it was time to pop the question. And so I had the ring, and I just had to figure out, like, what's something special I can do, that means a lot to the both of us. And a place where we spent so much time together was Assembly Hall. And we had a lot of great memories there. Again, like I mentioned, we hit the watch shot, which it's actually probably my worst moment in life as a boyfriend and significant other, because my wife had actually just had surgery on her knee. We were in the second highest row in Assembly Hall in the balcony, and that shot went in, and I completely forgot I had a girlfriend, and I just took off. And Jess was on crutches, and fortunately her roommate was with her to stick behind, because it was not exactly my highest moment as a significant other, but nonetheless, we did share that moment together, which not for long, but we did share that moment together.
Yeah.
And but yeah, so I didn't want to propose like at a game, on like the Jumbotron or something like that, but basically it was like a Sunday afternoon in February. I had planned with Jeremy Gray, like, hey, I'm going to pretend I'm doing like this hit for you, that you're interviewing people about the watch shot and something that could happen in Assembly Hall better than that. And like, would you be cool to open up Assembly Hall and just go along with that for me? He's like, 100%. He was like, I love playing jokes. Like, let's do it. And so, yeah, I convinced my wife that I was going to interview her, and she had to come up with something better that would happen at Assembly Hall on the floor than when the watch shot happened. And like, I kept telling her, like, you got to figure out something. She's like, there's nothing would beat that. Like, literally nothing. Like, I can't come up with anything. This is a stupid question. Like, don't ask me that. I'm like, I have to, like Jeremy says I have to. Like, it's just how it works. And obviously, I had her. So the whole thing was, I was like, turn around and envision something for 15 seconds that could happen better on the floor, and had her pointed towards where Watford hit the shot. And so she turned around, closed her eyes. I got on a knee. I turned around, and that was where she was supposed to like tell me what could happen better down there. And then obviously, she lost it and was in shock and awe. And it was really special moment. Was really cool. And because of like the nature of it being a video interview, obviously caught it all on camera, and still something that we watch at least once a year together, and just like reminisce about like the lead up to that day, because like she actually was really aggravated with me that I was going to ask that question, and like I was really aggravated with her that she kept telling me not to ask that question. So it was like, it's just funny, all the little nuances there. But again, because I was involved at IU in terms of the communications and stuff, like I met great people that were willing to do things like that for me. That was really, really special, and obviously like a top moment in my life.
Well, it is a great video.
I just wanted to say
posting that as well.
It is. I would just say that I'm just thankful I'm married. I was married before you did this, because it's just awesome. It's like, on behalf of the guys coming after that, that's a hard proposal to top, by any stretch of the imagination. So just well done. And we'll have it in the show notes. So when we get back from our break, we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of the analytics. and talk a little bit more about, from a coaching element, and kind of talk with Tony and pick his brain a little bit on that part of the game when we come back on X's and Joe's.
Welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Mike Weemuth, joined by Coach Bob Moats and our guest, Tony Adragna. So, Tony, we've covered who you are. Now we want to get to the traditional office space question. Like, what exactly do you do here at the Back Home Network? So maybe the best way to kick off that discussion is to broadly introduce the concept of analytics in basketball. So in your own words, what are analytics? And most importantly, like, how are they currently used in college basketball today?
Yeah, to me, analytics are a part of the equation to being a basketball team that plays at maximum efficiency and able to reach their ceiling in the most efficient way. And what I mean by that is I love analytics. I dive into them pretty much all day, every day. But they also are not the only thing that it takes to be a great basketball team and a great basketball coach. And so, to me, analytics it's deeper than like a box score. So for me, I don't define analytics as like points per game or rebounds per game or something like that. I'm looking at more of like box plus minus, offensive rating, defensive rating, block percentage, things like that are really, kind of the way to look at it is like ways you can take box score stats and then make equations out of those. Like, that's your analytics. You gotta type into Excel equals, and then you got to start doing some things with the formulas there in Excel to kind of get the analytics that help paint a picture of who a team is, right? And so that's what I think analytics help do. They help paint a picture of either players or teams and what they're capable of. And sometimes that's predictive analysis and analytics, and sometimes it's retrospective, where you're looking back at what a team did through whatever sample size that is, and you can get a pretty good glimpse of what they're doing. So, long-winded way of me kind of pointing out that it's a good way to see how a team's performing at a bit of a deeper level than just here's how many points they score and here's how many points they give up.
I remember, years ago, again, go back to what I call the ancient scrolls of multiple offenses and defenses by Dean Smith. His first part of his book is talking about points per possession back in the 70s and the 80s, and he used to keep it. He had his equation was back then. He would keep the number of field goal attempts with turnovers, and then basically divide it by the number of points. He had a way of also kind of looking at jump balls as being kind of almost a draw, but he used it that way so he could measure tempo. Like if he saw that his team had 90 shots plus turnovers in a game, and the next game at 70, he could figure out, well, against some opponents are going to play a faster tempo, against other opponents are going to play a slower tempo. And that whole idea of points per possession has always kind of jumped out as me when we start looking at, especially kind of that retrospective view on a team, what kind of how they performed, and looking at it as kind of that standard, where it's kind of grown now into possessions are being looked at differently, where we're looking more at rebounding percentages. Like Smith argues in the book that he would never have to keep rebounding stats because he knew how well his team was rebounding based on points per possession and the number of, like if his team had 74 field goal attempts and the opponent had 60 and turnovers were equal, he knew he was rebounding better than his opponent. And it was just stuff like that where it kind of started me in coaching as saying, I don't need detailed stat sheets. What I really need is I need to find maybe 4 or 5 really good areas that I can easily track with a bunch of 5th and 6th graders, I might add, that can actually tell me how these guys are doing and what we need to work on a night in, night out basis, over the course of a season. And
Yeah,
so that was, but with the analytics element of.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, Bob.
Yeah.
I think back in those days, like obviously they didn't have, sort of like the advanced stats we have now, but like it's interesting that like what Tony was saying, like, the box plus minus, that's basically just taking, the basic stats that we used to have and just adapting them into like, something that's a little bit more complex and like, putting a lot of like
Right.
sort of like more advanced like secondary like equations behind them that like can kick out all these like performance metrics that we obviously didn't have or weren't even looking at back in those days. So it is sort of interesting that like that even though we're looking at like different numbers and there's like all sorts of there's hundreds of different metrics out there, but they're all sort of like just using the very basic stuff that we've had for the last 50-60 years. It's just they're adding a lot of stuff on top of it that give you a little bit more data, a little bit more like insight into how to read the stuff,
and constantly refining as well.
And even
like
with
that's
KenPom and yeah.
Yeah, so like when you look
Go
at
ahead, Tony.
KenPom and Bart Torvik and things like that, like those guys are constantly updating like their coefficients, that they use to, try to find like baselines and things like that that will help, predict things for the future. Because like that's KenPom and Bart Torvik are predictive metrics. So like it's interesting when you read their blogs from like 2011 and he's talking about the log 10 method versus something else that he decided he was going to use after that, and the Pythagorean method versus the efficiency margins and things that he uses now. So that's the one thing that I love about the analytics community is it's like it's not just like, hey, we got the best numbers now and so we're done. It's like, how do we make this better? How do we refine this more? How do we help teams understand these things or players understand these things, whatever the case may be, and then like how does that become better and how do we build on this? Like that's what I love about it.
Yeah, we had one question that came in, Tony, on our Ask Us Anything pod. I guess it was like a few weeks ago, and maybe this is something we can discuss. Someone asked us, how are different colleges using analytics? Like exactly what programs and systems are they using and how are they using them? So maybe we could, jump into that a little bit because I know there's all sorts of vendors out there. It's like HD Intelligence, Jamball Analytics, Just Play, Sports Solutions. They do like playbooks, I think. And my favorite is Noah Shot, the Noah Pro Shot Tracking System, which like it's the cool one which I guess Southport is kind of like you said using it, is that they now have cameras that are basically tracking every shot, like what part of the rim it hits. So maybe
what the degree is, like the angle of attack,
angle, the spin, all that stuff. It's crazy just how like refined all this reporting is coming in now. So maybe discuss that, like, what are you seeing that schools are using and exactly how are they using it, within their programs?
Yeah, in terms of analytics, it's kind of all over the place, and it's really based on the individual coach, and like there's everybody has access to basically everything you'd ever want under the sun. Most of these vendors, as you mentioned, you're going to get similar statistics and data analysis, and I mean that's what these guys are. They're quite literally went to school to be data scientists, and it's with a focus, obviously in sports data and things like that. But honestly, it is a vast array. Like the NBA, they all use the same stuff. In college basketball, particularly in Division I, there's some companies that have third parties, or some teams that have third parties that will basically tell them how to run their program, hook, line, and sinker, like every single detail of what offense they should be running, what each player should be doing. And then there's other coaches that really don't look at anything beyond box score stats. And so it's a really interesting, just a vast array of difference in how different programs use it. So the number one like tool that programs are using is Synergy. And all of us are familiar with Synergy, and the reason Synergy is so widely used is quite literally every statistic that you'd want to see, you can click on it and you're going to get video clips of that. And that's for every player and every team at every level of college basketball. And also NBA uses Synergy as well. And so that one is widely used, especially for scouting, especially now with the transfer portal. You can get a leg up when you get words on, guys through intermediaries that in January that that they might be coming available. You can go dive into their film early on, very easily, very quickly, with a analytics kind of lens, and through an analytics lens. Synergy has quality of shot. It shows you mid-range shots, shots at the rim. And so you can really, depending on how you run your program, you can really find, the guys that fit the mold of what you want to do, given that you've got, a system in mind. And so, Synergy is definitely the most widely used like analytics / film tool. And that's just because everything is there. Like you don't have to go hunting or fishing for it. It's just there. Whereas some of these analytics companies, it is another expense, another thing that you've got to go out and seek. And you'll find a lot of those vendors and things that are like at the Final Four and stuff like that. Like they're trying to get programs, and that's where a lot of networking is done at the Final Four and those conventions and things like that. So you'll see a lot of these analytics companies popping up. Really like Alabama and Nate Oates just mentioned what they've been using or who they've been using in a press conference previously. And so like, who knows, those guys might kind of become the go-to in college basketball analytics and things like that. Because eventually what's going to happen is right now it's kind of an open market on these things. And really what people are trying to see is like, who's really good at this? And once somebody or a couple somebody's established themselves as like, we're the leader in this, that probably gets adopted by the NCAA or whatever the case may be, or conference-wide or whatever it may be. And like, they might be the go-to for that type of analysis at least like in the long term. So really interesting how it all is kind of playing out in the college basketball landscape, because the landscape is just kind of the wild, wild west, and there's a vast array of philosophies on it, depending on the program.
Yeah. I saw that I think HD Intelligence claims that they have 100 different schools under their wing now. So yeah, I think those are one of those vendors that are sort of coming up, I think, in that sense. Yeah, go ahead, Bab. Sorry, I cut you off.
And again, as time goes on, as innovation, as innovation continues, you also, again, like we were talking about earlier, with just the continuous looking for that additional edge. There's a lot of monkey see, monkey do in this. That if it works for Nate Oates, then everyone's picking up the phone and calling, or at least a significant portion start picking up and going, well, if you did it for Nate, you can do it for me. And then somebody else may try to find another angle to kind of get into the marketplace and to kind of get some different ideas into the conversation. And it's kind of like, when everyone read Moneyball and everyone started looking for players with on-base percentages. It's a similar sort of thing in basketball, where you start finding if everybody's kind of going in the same direction, well, you're no longer setting a trend. You're following a trend. And so the next question is, what programs figure out how to maybe differentiate themselves using and again, you're using a data-driven approach still. And that's where I think the marriage gets a little uncomfortable at times, because if it's just a predictive, which oftentimes the data will give you a good predictive, then it's going to go the way you're wanting it to go, or the way that it's kind of statistically geared to go. So how do you kind of sometimes beat your statistics? I think all of us, and again, if you've coached any more than maybe 10 games, you realize at some point in time that it's like you're going to have to do something other than just put your best five out there and hope for the best. You're going to have to try to find that edge, those multiple edges on your opponents. Pre-plan your adjustments, making sure your adjustments are ready to go when you need to make them, making sure your team's prepared to do those adjustments, as well as your program's philosophy. How are you, for everything from how you're going to defend the ball screen to how you're going to cover your rebounds and your rebounding, as well as, are you going to be, again, like looking at it from a Matt Painter perspective, are you going to utilize your post more than most teams in the country? Or, how you're going to utilize ball screen actions. All of those things, because sometimes it don't even matter really what you're running, it matters the philosophy behind it, where you're trying to get the basketball to the spots on the floor. So to me, it's more and more gearing towards, okay, with all the data that's out there, and Synergy is amazing in that regard. What Synergy does for us is it kind of gives us the ability to kind of say, okay, when we look inside the statistics and we look inside, what a player's doing, we have the ability now to really kind of drill down to an individual player level, but also Synergy is great because I can look at 24 minutes of a player during a certain game and see what his impact is, not just with the ball, but without the ball, and how they're playing on the defensive end on help side versus, just, okay, I can watch his blocks and that could be kind of cool. But I'm also interested in seeing in the 90% of the plays where he didn't have a block opportunity, how is that player playing in that type of situation, and how is it fitting into his scheme? So it's amazing what's at our fingertips versus what was at our fingertips 5 years prior.
Yeah,
when we're all
it's
waiting
incredible
inside the hall to drop their stat sheet. I mean, it's a totally different game.
Yeah, it's what we talked about with high school basketball and how it's changed over the last decade in terms of analytics and the data available and the amount of technology available. Like college basketball is the same way. And, Mike sent us a really cool article on the NFL that was talking about like separation distance with wide receivers. And like, basketball hasn't quite gotten to that level. Mike actually sent me down a rabbit hole of like looking for that type of data because it is cool, but it's like it's also the beauty of like a basketball, the way the game's played because it's such split second and where players are at on the floor it doesn't always necessarily dictate like if you got that separation or it's a little bit different than football, so it's harder to quantify, but I can only imagine where things are going from here, especially with, the emergence of AI and all of that stuff too. Just like with some data analysis I've done this offseason, I can just plug in years upon years of data into ChatGPT, and then I can start asking it questions, and it's going to spit it out to me a lot faster than I can run an analysis in Excel or in RStudio or whatever the case may be. And so, like, it's just hard to wrap your head around, like, where all of this is going because it's like, what are they going to think of next? And it's all really cool and exciting to somebody like me. I'm wondering when I'm going to reach that point of, like, where I become, like, the old crabby guy, and it's like, this is ruining the game. But, like, I haven't gotten there yet. I'm still really excited about it.
Tony, I have days, honestly, Tony's where I'm there. I have days where I'm there going, hell, what are we doing here, guys? I mean, this is like, okay, we've taken this to a level that it's like, I'm not sure I can get anything discernible out of what I'm looking at on certain elements. And that's the other thing is, you got to sift through a lot of the chaff as to what's really essential and what really isn't. And it's one thing if you're doing it with your team, it's one thing if you're analyzing another team. At a different level. But yeah, I'm with you, Tony, where it's like, yeah, there are some days where I'm like, okay, what's the point of this? And then luckily I've got someone like Mike to explain it to me or you to explain it to me where it's like, okay, oh, now I get it.
I must say, Tony, I was a little jealous of you that one day when you actually had the ChatGPT numbers, because I was trying to calculate like how many hours it would have taken me in the old days, like, when I was showing the stuff to Bob in the 90s, for me to do that, what you did probably in maybe about 5 to 10 minutes.
I can't even imagine. lots of,
frankly, I don't want to know what that figure is because it'll probably
or like how many computers it would have blown up of just like the amount of data in that, like, this little amount of RAM and hard drive space. Like, yeah, it's crazy, the sophistication level. Like, obviously it's at a macro level, like in our whole society and world, but like just at the micro level of basketball and analytics, it's really cool and exciting to me.
Exactly. So, great. In our next segment, we'll turn our focus to Indiana, and we'll try to get Tony's take on Mike Woodson's off-season haul in the portal. Next on X's and Joes.
Well, we're back, and we'll talk a little bit about what IU is going, what IU kind of did since the end of the season, not just in retaining a pretty good number of their players from last year, but also going out and finding at the point of this podcast 4 transfers coming in, as well as a 5th freshman and Bryson Tucker coming into play. Tony, kind of what are your initial thoughts as we kind of as we go into discussing what the program's going to look like next year?
You have to be impressed with what Indiana's brought in, right? But as we all kind of know, it's kind of put up or shut up time for this regime, and I don't mean that to like, sound like a hard ass or something. Like, it's where we are at, with the program.
Right.
They have a lot of talent that they brought in. I think I noted a couple weeks ago on a tweet, like, they have 88 points of production from last season on their roster. Now, I hope people don't get that twisted into me saying like Indiana's going to average 88 points per game. No, it's just saying like this is a program that has proven college production now that they didn't have last year. Like last season, Indiana, you had to do a lot of projecting to kind of get them where we wanted the program to be, right? So you're like CJ Gunn's got to make a jump, and Malik Renew's got to make a jump, and Caleb Banks is going to have to make a jump, and to Malik Renew's credit, obviously he did make that jump, but you had to do a lot of projecting. There wasn't a lot of proven college production on last year's team, and a lot of the guys you needed to make jumps didn't make the jumps, and it was a bad team, to be honest. Like, it was a barely top 100 Ken Pom team, and this year there's none of that. You've got a backcourt that scored at a high level at a power. Do we call it Power 4 now? Is that what we call, or what without the Pac-12?
I think I just use high major to, because we got to put the Big East in, and I'm also now making
that's true.
Mountain West in basketball needs to be given its proper due. So you're looking at high major of six major types of teams. And then you have kind of a next level of 3 or 4 where you have the American kind of fitting in, the West Coast Conference fitting in. And those would be kind of those programs jumping in. But yeah,
so
I think
proven high major
high
production,
major,
I guess.
It's really a power. Proven high major production is probably the best way to look at it. Would be with the guys coming in, especially with Rice and Carlisle coming in as being basically alpha dog scoring guards from 2 not bad. I mean, Washington State had a really good year, and Stanford, had a not as bad as it could have been year. I'll put it that way. Not enough to keep a coach hired, but definitely a decent season. But as we've looked at these guys, I think a lot of what a lot of us were talking about last year with more ability to attack off the bounce. Are we all in consensus that this is a lineup or this is a roster that has enhanced itself in that area?
Absolutely, yes. And they have the ability to, like you said, move a defense, create an advantage. Like, that's basketball, right? That's offense. Create an advantage, and then exploit that advantage, and then draw 2, and then kick, and then create another advantage until you get the best shot that you can get. And sometimes that's off of 1 pass, sometimes that's off of 4 passes. But it's all about creating advantages. And IU has guys that can create. Notice the key word there, create advantages. And they lacked in the creation last year, and their offense struggled because of that. And now, on paper, they have several guys that can create on the offensive end, which will give Indiana more opportunities to do different things on the offensive end as well. But again, it's one of those things where I'm cautiously optimistic, not for like the reasons people probably think I am. I'm cautiously optimistic because I have to see it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's
that's,
fair. I mean, I think it's fair after you've gone.
Good. I was thinking about, that was something I think we brought up previously, Bob, on on one of our last pods about guard speed, where we had kind of discussed that one of the biggest gaps, I thought, and I think you had agreed, that I had was just sort of like that creativity in the backcourt. It's not always just about speed. It's just there are guys that can get by people by using hesitation dribbles and all that. And I think that's something that I think you'll see with Miles Rice is that he's got the combination of the ability to get guy by his defender with speed, but he also has really good hesitation as well. So I think that's one area where I think we all agree that IU is going to be in a completely different place in terms of their guard capacity. One thing I want to ask you, Tony, specifically is as something I typically ask people that are fans or or let's say keen observers of particular teams when they have like some big changeover in their personnel. What's from your perspective, like what sets or actions do you think are now available to IU going into next season that may have been, let's say, more off limits last season based upon, let's say, the differences in personnel?
Yeah, I mean, I think the simplest one is just ball screens and being able to turn the corner off of those ball screens. Indiana just did not have that ability last year. And when you're in ball screens and you don't really have the ability to turn the corner, you're not a threat to come off of that ball screen and shoot it. The defense gets into what's called drop coverage, and it's fairly simple to guard. Well, now you have a couple of guys, really a few, because Trey Galloway could stress a defense, especially towards the end of the year. He proved that he was pretty solid there. But now you've got multiple guys that can do that. So you've got primary, secondary, and possibly even tertiary creators on the floor at the same time. And that's when you can really do some damage in ball screen actions and things like that. So at its simplest form, I think ball screens. I think horns sets would be great for this personnel because it keeps the floor open even while having two bigs on the floor. And I just think that those are some things that are going to open up for Indiana more of a sense than they happened to last year. But I mean, honestly, there's so much you can do when you have guys that can create, and like it comes down to the saying of like X's and O's versus Jimmy's and Joe's. Like when you have guys that can turn the corner and do other things, like it opens up your whole playbook. It really does. Like because then you can just maybe you had one action you like to run, but really the backside of it is where you were hoping to get a skip pass or something because you pulled the defense in. Well, Indiana they didn't stress the defense last year, so help side could stay in over help and stuff like that. And so that's what I'm excited about next year is like it's not so much like a scheme change. I certainly think there are things Indiana can do better from a scheming perspective, but it's more so just like how is Indiana going to stress the defense? What are defenses going to do to try to stop Indiana now that they got more creators? And then what does that do for everybody else? Guys like McKenzie and Baco and stuff like that aren't necessarily going to create their own shot, but when they get the ball in their hands with space and opportunity, they're pretty dang good. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Great.
Well, and I mean, Tony, we mentioned earlier about paint touches in particular, and I know this is where I think having multiple guys who can attack the basket, whether it's off of ball screens. I think, again, you're going to have at least three, maybe even if Gabe Cupps comes along more in some production, if Ja'Kai Newton is ready to play, you could have 4 or 5 guys out of basically spots on the floor at any given time that could attack off of ball screens. And that way you're not so reliant on post touches for for post touches for paint touches. Post is back when I think when you go back to game 25, 30 years ago, we saw a lot of offenses would utilize, you almost had to have a strong post presence in order to be effective because that was just kind of the way the game had evolved up to that point. As more guys have learned to ball handle, as the 3-point lines become more pervasive, when you get a guy that like Balo's a great example of this. You don't just have to feed it down to him; he can actually seal the post off for penetration. You don't necessarily have to throw it into him in those types of situations. One problem when you throw it to the post is that it's kind of slow to develop on the offensive end. Getting the pass in to feed, and then the help has to respond to it. A guy like a Renew or a Balo then has to look and see where the help's coming from, and then deliver what's oftentimes a very difficult cross-court pass in order to get that open to get the offense rolling and moving. This doesn't say IU's not going to run post, but it is going to say that now you have more options other than just to running in those areas, or maybe you'll get more single coverages, which would allow a guy like a Renew or a Balo to score the basketball in and around the blocks. I am excited over the fact and again, I should say cautiously optimistic is a good way to look at this, because I can also see more and more lineups where a guy like a Mackenzie Mbaka would be maybe not put in a position where he's going to be asked to play a driver type position, but more of a stretch 4 type position for longer periods. I feel like when we looked at IU's lineups last year, when they had Mbako in that position with either a Ware or a Renew playing the traditional post spot, felt like it was much more effective for IU with him there stretching and more of what we call a 3-guard look for the common, just from a common frame of reference. And now we may be in a position where we'll see maybe more of that, especially considering that it doesn't seem to be an Anthony Walker that we're looking to get playing time or a Peyton Sparks we're looking to get playing time. It's seeming like there's more drivers, more shooters, and also adding Luke Goody to the roster, I think is critical, because now you have a guy that can definitely stretch a defense and play that 4 out that Mike Woodson talked about when he first came to Bloomington.
Yeah, that's definitely good take, Bob. I think, it is going to be very interesting, because I think, the number of sets that are going to be available to IU is going to be much, much wider than it was last year. But like what Tony was saying, how is the staff going to approach it? Are they really going to adapt and really exploit the kind of advantages they may have with the guards? And it's interesting. I've always been a little bit more sort of, I guess, a little bit more lenient compared to some others in terms of interpreting what Mike Woodson's intentions are. I mean, Jalen Chafino clearly showed that Woodson can put the ball in the hands of a guard and really kind of let him do his work if he has the kind of skills and ability. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see, is Carlisle and Rice going to be given that same kind of freedom as you saw with Jalen in his 1 year at IU. So it's it'll be interesting to kind of see what the balance is in terms of the output between the guards and the bigs, because obviously last year was so IU had one of the heaviest disproportions in terms of their front court productivity versus the back court. So hopefully for going into next year, you'll see a lot more balance in the lineup.
Yeah, and that was going to say that balance is going to be critically important, because I feel like there have been years where, over the last 3 seasons, we've noticed that there are some times where some players just get lost on the offensive end, and it's almost like I use playing 4-on-5 or even in some cases 3-on-5 from a standpoint of who's taking shots and who's getting the looks.
Exactly. So we think we've have exercised all we want from segment 2.
Okay. Well, as when we return, we're going to wrap things up with Tony and be back on the Down Network to finish this episode up.
Welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Mike Weemuth, joined by Coach Bob Moats and our guest, Tony Adragna. Well, Tony, this has been fun.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
I hope it's been fun for you as well.
Absolutely. I mean, shoot, I just got to talk about myself for like an hour. I don't ever get to do that. Who doesn't like doing that, right?
Exactly. We thought this would be a good venue just because, obviously within the Back Home Network, I mean, on our pod, we're a little bit more degrees of freedom, I guess, in terms of, the kind of content we can present. And yeah, we can give a whole 30, 40-minute segment for someone to go through their background like this. So we thought it was a good opportunity. And yeah, I mean, just as known as you are and as many people like follow you, I thought, has Tony ever actually like presented in some kind of public forum, some kind of like description of his of where he came from and how he got here? So I thought, yeah, we need to take advantage of this and get the guy some some publicity and also some opportunity to actually present where he came from.
Well, it's really a hell of a story. It really is. I mean, it's just kind of growing up through the game of basketball in the state of Indiana when you were on campus, and just how you've maintained that connectivity not just to Indiana University but to the game in general. And again, it's high quality stuff that's being produced by you, and has been high quality over the last 5 years. That since I think you and I both have kind of started really kind of getting into this, and have just enjoyed not just our interactions, but I consider you a friend. I mean, I consider the friendship that that's come through this, because end of the day, like we're talking about coaching, it's all about relationships. It's all about, just getting to know people, getting to understand where people are coming from, opening yourself to new ideas, but also just, again, spending time talking about the things you enjoy with people who enjoy talking about them with you. So great that we got a little bit more of the Tony Adragna story today.
Yeah, and what's funny is I'll make a quick point too is, a lot of people will give me some crap sometimes because my Twitter handle is @Coach Adragna. I'm not an active coach. So funny story about that. If you look up the handle @Tony Adragna, it is also me. My previous job, I had to have a professional Twitter account where they basically, it was like an RSS feed they just like put out all of our blog posts on that Twitter handle. And so when I stopped coaching, I was actually like, all right, I'm going to go back to the Tony Adragna handle because I was no longer with that job. Well, that Twitter handle is connected to my old job's email address, and there is no way for me. So it's got two-factor authentication on it. And so I've tried numerous times to get that account back. And so I can't. And so it's like, I'm just Coach Adragna forever. Like I actually did make a conscious effort when I got out of coaching to go back to the Tony Adragna handle, and was not meant to be. And so that's just kind of a funny aside. Is like, I don't have a big ego about this. It's so much fun to talk IU basketball. It's so much fun to talk coaching, and like some of my best interactions on Twitter actually come in my DMs from people that are like, "Hey, love your perspective on this. Can you answer this question for me?" Or I'm really intrigued by this thought that you gave on assembly call. So like, I know my like public persona, like I can come off kind of just like, if you give me crap, I'm going to give it back. Like that's just, I feed trolls way too often, unfortunately, and I really shouldn't. But like that's actually not like my persona I love interacting with people on Twitter and like the DMs and stuff that I get 9 times out of 10 that are positive. I'm happy to talk through with people about their thoughts on the game of basketball, coaching. Like I just started following this one guy that does like data visualizations for basketball, and I just started following because I love his data visualizations. He like DM'd me as soon as I followed him and was like, "Hey, I love just like getting coaching perspectives on visualizations you're looking for. Like, let me know the types of things that you're looking for." And it's like, that's what makes social media cool. It's why I stay on an app like Twitter when like sometimes it can turn into a cesspool. It's because more time, like out of everything, like I just enjoy the interactions that I have with people that are genuine. Typically that involves you having your name and your profile picture on your Twitter account, but I digress. It's a lot of fun.
Names and profile pictures and no numbers. Yeah.
Yeah. The name with 9 numbers after it.
Keep the numbers.
We're probably not going to get along.
Out.
Yeah, we're probably not going to get along. But outside of that, I do genuinely enjoy the interactions that I have with people on there. It's still such a very, very small following in the grand scheme of things, but I never could have imagined that like even 10,000 people would follow me for, how I talk about the game of basketball. Like that's like a kid growing up in Indiana, like that's a dream come true. Like people care what I have to say about the game that I love so much. Like that's what makes it fun. And that's why, I maintain like a public presence on there because I do genuinely enjoy it.
Well, that's great. You've definitely, I think, drawn a pretty good audience, Tony. And I think most importantly, you've actually educated them because, there's a lot of people that get involved in this. I think that, get some attention, but, they don't necessarily produce anything on the other end for their viewers. And I think, you definitely say within the IU network, you've probably provided more actual like basketball education than possibly anyone, in the network. So definitely kudos for that.
It means a lot. Thank you.
Absolutely. And, owing to our, and this is, the segment 3 of X's and Joe's is always a little bit looser than the previous 2. So Bob and I always indulge in some of our, favorite pastimes. So, owing to our heavy addiction to old-timey entertainment culture, we just couldn't pass up this particular opportunity. So on our last pod, Bob had mentioned the doo-wop singer Fabian had appeared in the World War II flick The Longest Day. And I thought, wait, I know someone in our little band of rebels to the Back Home Network that looks exactly like Fabian. So we're going to actually ask the audience, take a look at these 2 pictures and tell us if you notice these similarities in these 2 photos. For
that is good stuff.
Yeah, for our audio only audience members, I've just posted a side-by-side shot of the singer Fabian and our own Tony Adragna. And I must say they do look pretty similar. Side note, Fabian, aka Fabian Anthony Forte, is a South Philly legend. Frankie Avalon and Bobby Rydell were like the really famous like 50s doo-wop heroes from South Philly. And just to drive the point home, for objectivity's sake, I did conduct a thorough and highly scientific study of the matter by asking 3 random elderly South Philly Italians to look at this photo comparison. And I'm happy to report that it was a unanimous finding. All agreed that it was in fact a match. So yeah, Tony, if you ever tire of your current career path, just know that, you can come to Philly and, put on a 50s doo-wop hairdo. And I think you could do pretty well in the, as a Fabian lookalike in the Philly doo-wop subculture.
That's a new one. I've not gotten this one. This is some A+ podcasting. I'm excited about this.
I just want to throw out there that if you get your hair to pull that off, I would be very impressed. I mean, I at the best I can pull off a good Don Rickles these days. That's about the length of my ability to be able to kind of pull off a hairdo of a celebrity from the *60s, from that era. But yeah, I mean, at the very least, I'll open for you and do some insult comics on a stoop in Philadelphia if you ever want to make that career change.
I'm in. Let's do it.
Oh man.
So we're going to wrap this up with a big thank you to Bob Thompson for the sounds that you hear on the show and the music that you hear. And a special thanks to John Ringer of rigdesign.com for designing our logo.
And for looking forward, episode 11, Bob and I will be discussing Hoosiers is not a documentary. We'll be exploring the mythos of Indiana basketball culture and how it fits into the modern era. Look for that one in about 2 weeks time. And we will have a few more guests slated over the course of the summer, including some guests I think everyone will enjoy listening to. So stay tuned for that. So this endless conversation was brought to you by the Back Home Network. Be sure to check out all the great BHN content, including Assembly Call, Doing the Work, and Crimson Cast on YouTube and Back Home Network. And Tony, your podcast is called
Right Up Meridian.
Exactly. When is your next show?
Scott and I recorded this morning, so it maybe is dropped as of Friday evening here, or Friday. I'm way ahead of myself. Monday evening here. But we try to do a podcast after every game in the playoffs, so we're on a pretty good cadence right now, and it's a lot of talking Pacers hoops, but I'm not mad about it.
No, it's great. I do like the show, and I do like the lead-in music. Sounds a little bit like Space Oddity by David Bowie. So I kind of like that guitar lead-in. It sounds
it is a nice one.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So check that out. So again, until next time, I'm Mike Weemuth.
And I'm Bob Mose.
Have a good one, everybody.
Thank you for joining us, and have a good one.